Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Measuring Impact in Multifamily Housing. We'll give it another minute or so. We're going to allow folks to join in and get settled. So hang out for a minute or so, and we will jump into the webinar shortly. Looking forward to a conversation with our panelists, Tom and Rachel. Just out of curiosity, Tom and Rachel, where are you today, and what's the weather like where you are?
Well, I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. I live right over the border in Montgomery County, and it's a little dreary out after finally spring is hit here, and we've actually had some pretty nice weather, but I think the rain is coming.
And I'm in San Diego, California, and we are getting some serious rain for us. So it's an exciting day. This is rare and kind of needed. So it's good.
Nice. Well, I am in northern Colorado, and it's sunny and feels like the beginning of spring, which I'm looking forward to. I'm ready for the winter to move along.
Not too many ski days left, I guess.
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
So I have a couple of minutes after the hour. We shall get started. Before we jump into the discussion, some logistics and housekeeping. First, this webinar is being recorded, and we will distribute the recording to everyone after the session. So look forward to that. We would definitely want some audience engagement and input, and have some time set for the end of the webinar for questions. But if you have any questions at any point, just submit it to the GoToWebinar control panel in the kind of box in the upper right. We'll attempt to answer as many as we can, and if we don't get to all of them, we can always follow up individually as required. With that, let's jump into the discussion. We're excited to have everybody on the line today. It's going to be an interesting discussion around the topic of impact reporting, and my colleagues Rachel and Tom are excited to dialogue with you on this growing and interesting topic. I'm Jack Davis with Conservice, and to ground everyone on our backgrounds and experiences, we're going to run through some quick introductions. Obviously, you can see on the screen, Rachel, Tom, and myself will be your discussion panelists for the day. But let's go into a little more detail on your background. So, Tom, if we could hear a little bit about you and Lincoln.
Yeah, great. I appreciate the opportunity, Jack. So I've been in the multifamily and affordable housing space for a little over 20 years now. The first 17 years of my career, I was with the National Housing Rehabilitation Association, which is a national trade group for affordable housing developers. Worked on a lot of different sustainability initiatives over the years there, which really kind of piqued my interest into the impact space. Worked with the MacArthur Foundation to develop energy retrofit training curriculum, and was very involved in a lot of the different federal green initiatives over the years. About 3 years ago, I joined Lincoln Avenue Communities, which is a large national affordable housing developer. As you can see on the slide here, we own a little over 170 affordable rental communities in about 29 states. I think that number will be more like 31 or 32 by the end of the year when you consider our pipeline. And we're very much a triple bottom line, mission-driven developer. So everything that we do is really focused on impact, whether it's affordability, whether it's utility management, sustainability from a resiliency perspective as well has become really important for us. My role within the organization, I lead up all of our public affairs, as well as our sustainability, resident impact, and resiliency platform. So a kind of interesting hybrid role. And before I hand it over to Rachel, I just want to talk about my nights and weekends job as well. I also run, and I don't have a slide for this, I should have, but I also run a small nonprofit called Fairview Housing Partners, which is a one-stop shop affordable housing intermediary that overlaps with a lot of the activity that I do at Lincoln. So resident services, subordinate lending, and joint ventures with other developers to help facilitate a lot of the types of outcomes we'll be talking about today.
Thanks, Tom. Rachel, how about you?
Awesome, happy to. And Tom, I will start referring to my outside work as my nights and weekend job as well. That's a perfect way to describe it. And that was actually my first into the Multifamily Impact Council. So my name is Rachel Mavrathalis-Petes. I serve as COO for MIC now for about a little over a year now. I've been on the team. And I've been in the housing space for about 13 years now, first really focused on crisis response and housing for children in the child welfare system, and then later on with young people experiencing homelessness. And then I made a pretty hard pivot and started working within private equity, focused on impact measurement and management for an affordable and workforce impact fund. So it's that work that launched my nights and weekends job, which is a consulting practice focused on impact measurement and management within housing, and how I really first got connected with MIC. So I have a few slides here. I'm going to run through them super fast, but that's so that we can put down slides and stay conversational thereafter, just to kind of ground into who the Multifamily Impact Council is and what our framework exists to do. And part of why I love what we're doing now is it's really about building a collective approach in field building to how we can do more, do well, and do better together. And so here's the three primary mechanisms by which we achieve those objectives. First off, we maintain an evidence-based impact framework that supports stable returns for investors and better lives for renters. And we cast a broad but focused tent. So we are a multi-stakeholder group. We have equity investors, lenders, syndicators, owner-operators, service provider partners, et cetera, who are all focused on delivering affordable, sustainable, impactful housing. So next up is really, we're setting an industry standard for impact investing. And what we mean there is within that multifamily impact framework that we'll dive into today, each of the 7 principles has a definition, which is really critical as we think about building collective knowledge and transparency about what we mean when we say impact. But it also establishes a minimum threshold, what impact framework adopters and members agree to uphold as they're kind of setting forth their impact strategies. And we think that builds transparency around what these strategies set out to do, and also builds the mechanism by which we can continue to drive forward and tick upwards what those minimum thresholds achieve. And then lastly, and this is some of the most fun elements, we build relationships among professionals. It's really incredible to see not only the deal flow that comes from members meeting one another and connecting, but also just the shared learning and sort of by having multi-stakeholder groups at the table defining this framework together, we get some really interesting conversations and I think the most relevant tool out of that. So if we move to the next slide, maybe just to level set why we're focused on the strategy and asset type that we are. People spend the most time in their homes of any other place on earth. And for 40 million Americans, that home is an apartment building. So when we think about impact, there's incredible scale and opportunity here to serve people better. Small call out there, maybe you can read it. 40% of global carbon emissions are coming from the commercial real estate sector, so that's huge. Probably doesn't come as a surprise to anyone on this call, but nearly 20% of those operating emissions are driven by the multifamily sector. And so that means that multifamily operators have huge potential to reduce emissions and the effects on the environment by focusing on their utility consumption and associated emissions. So these facts make multifamily properties the perfect asset class for impact investors seeking long-term investments and stable cash flow. But then we'll get into this a little bit as well, that the way that multifamily works and what we know to be just the, unfortunately, consistent and pent-up demand for affordable units means that it is a really strong investment type regardless of your impact affiliation. And so that is one of the areas that we think that the framework can really continue to support in building that linkage between impact behavior and financial return. So last slide here before we take these down and move to Jack's intro. We just want to lay out kind of for you all here what those principles are. So we have 7 principles within the impact framework, each associated, as we said, with a definition, a threshold, and then some associated impact metrics. And that is affordability, resident engagement, economic health and mobility, housing stability, health and wellness, climate and resiliency, and good business, meaning at the fund or organizational level, how do you operate your businesses and treat your people? So I'll pause there for now, and then we'll get into more later.
Thank you, Rachel. It's great to see the background there. So just as a reminder, I'm Jack Davis. I'm the Vice President of ESG Strategy for Conservice. Conservice, if you aren't familiar with us, is the largest utility management provider in the United States. We focus on real estate and managing the utility needs for our real estate clients. And because we're at the intersection of energy and real estate, we get drawn into a lot of the more strategic real estate and ESG and sustainability questions that our clients are dealing with, whether it's raising capital, reporting to different frameworks, just saving money through cost energy efficiency and cost savings, renewable strategies, climate risk, et cetera. So our team is really set up to support all sorts of needs across this space, and glad to be the moderator and host of today's discussion. So let's dive into some details and kind of talk a little bit more about the rationale, Rachel. I love origin stories. Was there a triggering event or something that happened that triggered the framework to be developed? Somebody said, aha, we need this, here's why?
Yes. And I wish I had been at the kitchen table when this triggering moment happened, but I've heard it shared with me, so I'll do my best to recount it here. So this is really, so the council was launched in 2022, and really in May of 2022, and sort of some of the impetus was Antonio Marquez, head of Comunidad Partners, and Bob Simpson, at the time retired multi-decade Fannie Mae leader and professional focused on affordable and climate strategies. We're sitting down to talk about the post-COVID era and how can folks who are trying to deliver impact in affordable housing make clear how their strategies are different from kind of others out there, and also respond to the massive shifts and kind of transitions that the sector was going through. And so it was sort of this aha moment of we really need to bring people together and knowledge share and field build. And we need a defined framework that addresses our component of the industry. There's GRES, which is great for all of commercial real estate. There's other areas that have attention, but we know what this asset class can do for investment portfolios. And really we need to build visibility, help people understand the impact opportunity and also the return potential. So it started from there. There was 21 founding members when we first launched in May of 2022, and we've just been steadily building from there.
Nice. You mentioned in your last slide the 7 principles, and I would love to just understand, maybe give us a flavor of 1 or 2 of the metrics that kind of are in those principles. You don't have to name a bunch, but just give the audience a little bit of a sample of some of the types of things that are being reported on.
Happy to, and maybe what I'll do here, if I can figure out the chat in this platform, is I'll drop into the chat here the download link so that people can go ahead and download the framework and have it up on your screen. I think that's honestly the best way to get a sense of it. But let's just start with affordability, because that is sort of the grounding principle. We always say that no principle is better than any other, but affordability is pretty much that base, right? And so the way we define affordability for members and framework adopters is that, thank you so much for reposting that, is that 50% of the units, a minimum of 50% of the units are affordable to residents earning 80% of area median income in standard markets, and with exceptions for really cost-burdened markets, severely cost-burdened markets, up to 120% of AMI. And we know that that's, a high threshold for some, a low threshold for others, just depending on their portfolio type and style. But we think that that's a really nice way to really define what it is that we're talking about here, which residents and how many of those units. The metrics that are associated with that principle are how many of your units, number and percent, are rent restricted at what AMI band, how many of your non-rent restricted units fall at those same AMI bands, so by virtue of maintaining affordable rents, internally imposed objectives, and then are you accepting housing choice vouchers? Because we recognize that source of income discrimination a huge issue in access and affordability. So those are the sort of expected metrics. Within the framework, we also have a fair bit of impact guidance and best practice around, okay, when you go to report your affordability, talk about the cost differential. Report on that dollar saved for the renter between your unit and the next best unit in the market to demonstrate the real meaning for their lives by having that rent saving. I can go through the others, but maybe that's a good enough example for now.
No, that's good. I just would love it. I was hoping for exactly that, a flavor of it. Tom, tell us how you got involved with the council and, your little, involvement and work so far in terms of the framework.
Sure. So actually, when I was still at NHNRA, I actually remember having lunch with Bob. Probably would have been early spring 2022 as he was kind of thinking through how to organize and form a C6 around the Multifamily Impact Council. So I certainly wasn't, the brainchild like Antonio, but I was really excited by what Bob was doing and was really pleasantly surprised when I joined Lincoln that the team that had preceded me had actually already initiated those conversations. And I think we're founding members, and if we weren't, we were pretty darn close to it.
You were, for sure.
And it's been a really important part of the development of our long-term sustainability and resiliency strategy. So as I mentioned in the intro, we were very much a triple bottom line focused organization, but we're also a relatively new organization. I think we're only 8 years old, and we've experienced quite a lot of growth over the last 5 years in particular. So being able to benefit from the thinking and our peers from the Multifamily Impact Council as we take a lot of our ideas and systematize them into a strategy, it's been really helpful. So I've been really engaged in the development of the framework, as much learning as contributing, I'd say. And I'm also proud to be a member of the MIC Board of Directors. I was invited to join in 2023.
Well, to follow up on that learning comment, it is a new tool. Any early takeaways as you've tried to apply it to your real estate and your reporting and your kind of stakeholder engagement?
Yeah, so our organization has kind of grown organically, but in fits and spurts. We had a lot of ad hoc initiatives, a lot of, again, triple bottom line values, but taking those values and turning them into a formalized program, that's where it's really been, where the framework has been incredibly helpful. So how we went about doing that, just by way of background, one of the first initiatives that I took on when I joined Lincoln was we engaged an organization to conduct a maturity assessment for us. And this was really a way to do a 360 review of our organization, our strategy, our portfolio, and help focus, first level set and benchmark, identify blind spots, and again, kind of like take our various initiatives and turn them into something more formal, more scalable. And one of the outcomes of that maturity assessment was very much focused on what is the standard and framework we want to work within moving forward. And honestly, for anybody that has not undertaken that type of internal review, it's incredibly instructive. Seeing how you stack up against your peers beyond sort of your standard business metrics is helpful, but there were a lot of things that we learned about ourselves. Again, I call them our blind spots that, we've put a lot of attention to over the last couple of years as a result of that exercise. Although we were already involved in MIC when we undertook this exercise, and we're committed to using the framework, as it turns out, after evaluating the various options available to us, we thought this was actually the most appropriate, for a multifamily affordable housing participant, as compared to there's lots of other frameworks out there, and I think we're going to talk about that. But it was really, I think, an innovative idea to, for Bob and the team to really delve into what affordable housing is, how it's different than other asset classes, and how to communicate that to various stakeholders in a measurable way. And I think that the accountability that it has created is great for kind of investor reporting, but honestly, it's also helped us really improve our financial performance and identify opportunities to mitigate risk that ultimately, I think about the business case for using this framework or other frameworks, but this one in particular, it's to really ensure that our assets will not just retain, but increase their value through appropriate steps, and that we'll retain our top talent and be able to attract more of that. So that's a little bit, I guess, about how we've got focused and engaged with MIC and how we're using the framework, not just as a reporting mechanism, but really as a strategic tool.
Well, I'm glad to hear the success of your materiality assessment and feeding that back into the framework, because we fully endorse that here with our team and work with a lot of clients to do exactly that. And in fact, given the market size shifts we're seeing in sustainability and ESG, sometimes you might want to update your materiality assessment if it's 2 or 3 years old, because stakeholders change and the market changes. Rachel, are you seeing similar? What's the adoption like with your members? The framework, people starting to kick the tires on this and use it. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so maybe I'll make this distinction. So the Multifamily Impact Council, as mentioned, is a 501c6 membership organization. When we launched May of 22, there was 21 members. The first Multifamily Impact Framework was launched in 2023, and that was really kind of that year of building with those founding members, determining what the framework should contain, et cetera. When the framework was launched, we committed to an annual refresh of that tool. And I think that's actually one of the biggest benefits of membership, is that you have this voice and kind of, influence over how that tool continues to evolve. And so when you ask if we've been kicking the tires, yes, we kick the tires every year. And it does produce some meaningful updates. Last year, I think the biggest shift was really in user interface, and kind of how we laid out what is critical, what is the pieces that you are committing to, those 20 metrics, those 7 impact thresholds, but then what is the best practice, what's above and beyond, how might you think about some of the narrative elements of reporting, et cetera. We also last year folded in a resident engagement checklist to really make kind of operational and easy how you go about building that resident engagement platform and approach. And then we also built in a deeper look at external alignments across 10 relevant frameworks. So that process is ongoing. I think we're going to continue to evolve. In terms of adoption, it's been really lovely to see. So now we're up to 80 members. We're up 54% adjustment year on year last year in membership, which is great. And then in terms of downloads, the tool has now been downloaded over 800 times, which is incredible. We think that's about 350 organizations based on kind of deduping, and we're using the tool. And we're seeing kind of broad industry use even among non-members. So that's a really critical feature for us. The framework is free to use. We put it in the chat there because we want folks referencing it, and really, we believe that those metrics are the most critical and most useful, frankly. And so we want people to drive impact by using them.
What are you hearing? Are you getting any feedback from the investment community? Do they like the tool? Are they seeing, oh, yeah, this is nice, a way to help understand what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have investors as part of our community. So among equity investor members, they help design it, and so their voice is certainly present. We've had some great conversations with pension funds who can't necessarily become formal members at this moment in time because of limitations on kind of membership fees and annual dues. But we're actually kind of essentially thinking about different ways we might engage them so that they can be formally involved. But it's been really wonderful to see that these are the same metrics that they want access to, that, by having the owner operator voice or sign off to say, yes, these are the things that we can reasonably produce, for them to know that these are reasonable things to request, is what we've heard is really helpful. And also, I think we're starting to see more and more recognition and understanding of what the MIC brand means and what that kind of affiliation demonstrates commitment to. And so potentially acting as a shorthand for, okay, let's focus our diligence on kind of these operators. Is what we are seeing some of, and I hope to see more of, certainly.
Just a reminder to our audience, if you do have questions, please input them in the question panel, and we'll address those here in a little bit, and looking forward to some engagement. Clarify one thing for me, Rachel. Is there a score or a rating or a grade that you get when you participate in this, or is it just kind of more of a benchmarking and reporting tool?
Great question. Yeah, we get that question a lot, and that distinction. So at this moment in time, no. The goal was to put forth a framework that had that collective buy-in, what is most salient, most important, and most feasible to produce. And then that conversation becomes a market conversation between your stakeholders, your investors, and your investees. What is good enough should be determined within the context of that investment relationship. That said, I think we will start to build towards a benchmark at some point in time. The way we think about that potentially is for the affordable housing, those designated as either Capital A affordable housing or workforce housing. How do they stack up and perform? Because we know, both from a returns perspective and stability perspective, other financial metrics, we know that there's just some washing out of the benefit of an affordable housing platform in a portfolio when it gets lumped in with some of these other strategies. So we're thinking about that. We're looking at partners we may be able to work with, but that would, if anything, be a 2026 initiative that we'd take on.
One of the benefits that I really see about the framework too is the common language around the key terms and initiatives, which just speaking about housing affordability, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and just even defining that in a way that you can compare potentially a tax credit developer to a HUD developer to a naturally occurring affordable housing preservation developer to a workforce housing developer, and so that the market can really understand what affordable housing means and how we define and report that, I think, is an important market innovation. And I'll just say from your earlier question about sort of investor adoption, I think we're still at the educational phase and building awareness, and part of that awareness will be more people using it. But it has certainly been helpful for us in our conversations with our financial stakeholders. It's a differentiator that I think has resulted in better deal terms, certainly across the board, as well as access to philanthropic dollars and things that those financial stakeholders may have access to because they know we're actually measuring the impact and have concerted plans. So I think that hopefully in time it'll bring new capital to the equation, maybe concessionary capital to the equation, but even at its kind of current toddler phase, I think we're seeing interesting results in the market.
So let me explore that a little bit further. Rachel, this tool is designed obviously for affordable housing and impact investing, but do you see applicability beyond those markets? Like if I run a market rate housing fund, is there something I can use out of the tool?
Yeah, so I think the question is yes, the answer is yes, and to that question. I mean, I very much see value for mixed income developers to look at the tool, to think through it. We've had some really interesting conversations with both mixed income and middle income folks thinking about, okay, why is housing stability important? Well, your residents stay longer, it drives down your operating costs. I mean, there's all these benefits to thinking about these 7 areas of business in a really defined way, even if affordability is slightly different based on your strategy. I think where it breaks down potentially is that, the metric or the tie-in between impact and financial outcomes is really built on maintaining your resident base, right? And so if you're executing a highly speculative strategy that needs to be turned over really, really quickly, it's not going to really make sense for you, because these things are about knowing your residents and delivering for these residents on site. That said, I would not necessarily endorse a strategy like that, both because of the known sort of impact of outcomes and sort of effect on households and communities from highly speculative rent raising and kind of turning over units, but also because when you're building in the abstract, like a theoretical resident who's going to occupy this unit versus understanding the resident and market and geographic factors of where you are placed, it just builds in a lot more risk to your strategy. And so I think when we think about that investor education and kind of field building education of why this strategy makes so much sense, so much of it is around just that long-term approach. This is about stability, not a lot of kind of risks and peaks in market cycles.
Yeah, I would endorse that. We all bring our own personal values to the equation, but ultimately every single part of the framework is focused on enhancing long-term value. And in the rental operations business, where it is a long-term hold, it allows us to think a little bit differently about long-term value and initiatives that don't have necessarily immediate ROI, but over time should increase the value of the portfolio, whether it's by having longer tenured residents and decreasing our turn costs, increasing their personal financial stability, again, so we have less turnover, or lots of things related to sustainability and operating costs, and having the talent to maintain the portfolio over time. So it is a business tool for us as much as it is a value tool.
Well, Tom, you mentioned already that it's stimulating some interesting conversations with your investors. I'm curious, two questions here. Are there any data that you're collecting through the framework that's been really tough to gather? What's the toughest KPI or piece of information you want to grab? And the second question is, any of those metrics surprise you in terms of investors really keying in on, what's that number about? Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, so honestly, we were building kind of the data platform from scratch. And so we've had some false starts, honestly, on the data side. So historically, collecting the sustainability and utility data was really challenging. And actually, that's why we're working with Conservice now, not to overtly turn this into an ad, but that is really tricky. We have 170 assets and literally thousands of utility bills, and tracking and benchmarking that data is tough, but I think we're making good progress there. I think that obviously I run our resident services programming, or I run the team that does, and it's easy to track participation and engagement. It's a lot harder to actually evaluate effectively what the outcomes are. So that's definitely part of the learning curve for us, and still definitely a work in progress. And then lastly, we know a lot about our residents, and I can tell you, with a high degree of confidence how many people are late paying their rent in any given month. But a lot of the housing stability data points are still a little bit challenging, because we use third-party property managers, and we have multiples of them, and each has their own reporting software, and some are better than others. And consolidating all of that across a large portfolio and getting consistent data, requires a lot of work. And over the course of working within the framework, we've actually, in addition to changing our sustainability data sources, we also rolled out a different asset management software, in large part to collect all that property management data in one spot, and then to build in to the database a lot of the data points that we want to track through the Multifamily Impact Council framework. And honestly, we're like in the middle of our 2024 reporting right now. It's not been a easy lift, but I think it'll be a productive one. I've got a first draft meeting next week to see what we got. And if we had this webinar a week later, I'd be able to tell you all the things that we weren't able to collect and figure out the strategy there.
Thank you. That brings up another question. Rachel, is there a deadline to file by? Is there a seasonality to this, or is it just voluntarily report out when you're ready?
Yeah, so there's not a deadline to file by. Again, it is really between each operator and their kind of financial stakeholders, to use Tom's language. What we often see is that impact reports come out in the spring, early summer, because it does take a while. It takes at least a quarter to close out the last year's data, if not, a little bit longer. And I think that is good, right? Like, we want this to be meaningful. We want this to be thoughtful. We maintain an inventory of all of those impact reports. We're updating it now, so Tom will be very excited to add yours all to it when it's ready, just for folks to reference kind of how people are doing this. But that's not required by way of membership, that those are submitted to us. It's just a great way to uplift our members' hard work and share that final product and give others kind of that guidepost of how they might get there. We're also developing an impact reporting template to help folks in that process as well.
And Jack, I neglected to answer the second part of your question, which is what's resonating with investors. And honestly, it's really interesting because I feel like each investor and financial counterparty has their own thing that they're really excited about. So I have some groups that are just really focused on affordability. Other groups are really excited about, digital literacy and digital, like, high-speed internet access. Other groups that are focused on after-school care. Other groups that are focused on, extreme weather resiliency. So, we pull different. Some of that's in the framework. Others are things that we've actually bootstrapped our own additional frameworks around to get to. But it's it's not universal what folks are most interested in after, of course, financial performance, which is always the first data point everybody cares about the most.
That's great to hear.
Just to add to that. Oh, sorry, Jack. I just want to add to that point, if that's okay. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the way the framework is set up. It gives you a sense there's these 7 principles. These are the areas that are most critical. But within that, we recognize that each operator, based on their own capabilities and those stakeholder interests, are going to outperform in certain areas. They're going to go really deep on health and wellness because they have a health-motivated family foundation that's in their capital stack potentially, or whatever it may be. So I think there's plenty of room to demonstrate your shining stars, so to speak, and kind of how flexibility of what the framework sits for.
Well, a question for both of you then. What's next for the framework, or is there something that you'd like to see introduced in the future? Tom, in terms of practicality, or, Rachel, you mentioned it's kind of an annual exercise. What's around the corner?
I'd love to hear from you what you want to see. Yeah, go for it.
Well, so something that we've worked on internally over the last year and a half, that's, I don't know if this is something that could get baked into the framework or not, but one of the biggest challenges that we have as operators right now is the rising cost of insurance. And some of that is driven by natural disasters, some of that's driven by operational strategy, and some of that's driven by the tort environment, for lack of a better word. So we built an internal due diligence tool to really focus on evaluating our properties. So not just benchmarking them when they're operating, but evaluating opportunities up front against those types of risk factors. So natural disasters, societal crime, education, school quality, things of that nature. we kind of have internal standards on what's acceptable to us, and then standards that are acceptable if there are appropriate mitigants in place. We think that it's very much aligned with the values and principles of the Multifamily Impact Council framework, and that it's kind of long-term value oriented. But I'd love to see us as an organization evolve to explore some of those issues as well, particularly after the last couple of seasons of natural disasters. I mean, our offices are in Santa Monica. We had to evacuate the corporate headquarters just because of the recent wildfires, and we've got 10,000 plus apartments in Florida, and so we've got a lot of wind and storm exposure. And I think that that's a natural kind of fit. It's not necessarily a benchmarking fit because you're there or you're not, but there are steps you can take, and there's certainly that's something that our investors and counterparties are increasingly focused on. And I'll just, I guess, close out on a lot of this, what I'd call sort of like societal type of opportunities. A lot of the initiatives that we're reporting on in the framework from the resident impact side are really the mitigants to the risks that we've identified up front. So there is a synergy there that I'd love to see MIC explore further.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. That's great to hear, because that is sort of, we have this annual enhancement process. The market will tell us how the tool needs to evolve, and so I'm excited to hear how it goes. My prediction was going to be sort of related to what Tom was sharing. Last year we launched this resident engagement tool, right? That's this checklist to just help you think through the process. I was thinking that we could end up launching something similar as it relates to your resiliency and disaster preparedness plan. What are the steps that you might need to take as you start to evaluate each property, communicate that to your teams, make sure that's communicated to your residents, and kind of have that safety mechanism in place and responsive mechanism in place. I love what you're sharing, Tom, and we are always eager to help leverage and elevate work that our members have done. So if there's ways to kind of build off of the internal process that you've done, it sounds very thorough and thoughtful. But I think we'll see what the process brings us. I imagine that we'll focus deeper in some of those areas. We may hear from the current political climate some requests on kind of how we think about things, but I foresee us really staying true to the objective, which is to demonstrate that impactful behaviors drive financial return, and here's the linkage.
Agreed. And Tom, I think we could do an entire webinar on due diligence and insurance costs and climate risk all together. So we may flag you for that. We'll see. I'd like to invite the audience to submit questions, to our panelists, and stump the chump here a little bit, see if we can kind of get some interesting dialogue going. We do have one question that I will try to respond to here. It's about pulling whole building data and tenant and resident data together in terms of multifamily reporting on multifamily energy consumption. And the question is, does Conservice have a tool? And I would say yes, we have a whole quiver full of tools to tackle that very thorny problem. Whole building data is kind of the Achilles heel of ESG and sustainability in real estate, and there's no one solution, but happy to work with you. Anybody who's interested on how we would approach those type of problems, and whether it's an API, working with utilities directly, using tools like Energy Star, other things. So whole building data, I'm sure, Tom, you and Rachel have both dealt with those trying to crack that nut for a while.
Yeah, it's so hard on multifamily residential. Even in best case scenarios where like the legal structure is in place where the utilities have to report, if that's not the case and you have to get consents from all your residents, or they have to send you their bills, I mean, it's really, it would be impossible to even attempt that without a good third-party service provider like a Conservice. So much of it is manual and has to be keystroked in. That's one of the biggest frustrations that we hear from our, our asset management team on that. And then, there are like 5,000 utilities across the country when you count like all the little community co-ops and everything. And, working with some of those local smaller utilities can be even more challenging. I know Service has done as much as anybody to come up with effective tools to manage it, and but I think, I don't know if there's policymakers out there listening. I think some strategy from DOE or the Congress or something to facilitate that more easily would be well received.
Well said.
Yeah, if only we could find the right person to wave the magic wand and make it all go away, right? Another question coming in, I think this is for Rachel. How do you see the framework evolving in response to regulatory changes or changing investor expectations over the next few years? I know it's hard to project into the future, especially in today, for example, but any ideas?
I mean, I don't see us needing to change, certainly, to regulatory changes at the moment. Like the way the framework is set up, it fits well with whatever let's just say, for example, we're talking about LIHTC properties, it fits well with your regulatory reporting requirements within that context. In terms of investor demand, I mean, certainly that is why, like we said, we have an annual refresh of the tool. This is a market-based solution. We need to be evolving and responding to the market. So if areas come up to say, this is actually very critical to us, we need to focus more here, we would do that. But I think we're seeing, continued demand for what we have. I'm cautious to overly predict. We never know what's going to happen, but I think we're well situated at current. Non-answer for your answer.
Thank you. Tom, a question for you. Can you share specific examples of how the framework has influenced decision-making at Lincoln, whether acquisitions, operations, et cetera?
So, yeah, we, and I'll kind of focus on sort of my part of the business. As we are evaluating acquisitions now, and we're evaluating kind of what's going on in the community, having a set of standards and framing around resident services and how they can increase and improve operational outcomes is a huge part of our due diligence process now. So we know, for example, that areas where there's lower performing schools or higher crime rates, if we don't have impactful resident programming in place to either keep the kids busy or to mitigate some of the societal factors that are affecting the broader community, we're going to have worse outcomes. Those are the properties that are historically on our watch list. So I would say before we had the framework, we were probably under-evaluating some of those risk factors and under-evaluating the types of mitigations that we can put in place to address them when they exist. And I think that has resulted in better deals that have come through our pipeline and investment committee over the last year, and fewer problems as a result. And then, I will say that when we're better at reporting out, again, some of those impact initiatives to our investors and to our financial counterparties, oftentimes they've brought new resources to the table that we were not anticipating. Oh, you guys are doing resident services. We actually have money set aside at the upper tier in the fund to provide funding for these types of initiatives. So that's been, if you don't share it and you don't report it, they don't know about it, and don't bring those opportunities to the table. And that comes up all the time.
We got a good one here, and I think I'll open it up to both of you. What do you think is the biggest misconception about ESG and impact reporting in the multifamily sector?
Ooh.
Um, I think that generally we do a pretty good job on the S part of ESG. The ROI is readily visible and attainable, and there's a good long track record on that at this point. Because so that part's pretty easy. The sorry, I guess that was the E part, not the S part. The S part and the G part, there's uh, less understanding of that.
Yeah.
From my perspective, and this is maybe like globally going to be the case. I mean, we're almost exclusively a low-income housing tax credit developer, and so all of our investors are specifically in the business to address affordable housing. So that is very well understood by our investor base. But when I talk to our peers that are working in the workforce space and the NOAA space, I think that is much less well understood. And I mean, that's what the framework is there to do. And, on the governance side, I think that's just, in some respects, that's the easy to pick fruit, having good hiring practices to attract talent, having good, who in the industry hasn't been at least affected in some way by the various fraudsters out there. Having those best practices in place are really critical to stable, consistent operating. But I think when people hear ESG, they sometimes think something else that's not what I think of as just good, thoughtful, operating business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the misconceptions range from whether you're kind of in the field, in the weeds versus outside of it. So I would say for those folks who are at least somewhat versed in this space, kind of working within the data in some capacity or other, I think there's a misconception that the S is all narrative or can't be quantified and hard metrics. And I completely disagree with that. I think we can absolutely produce numeric metrics that define our social impact strategies and evaluate them and track them over time. In particular, I think from the outside, for those not in the field, I mean, I think we've seen some of those misconceptions kind of rear their head in pretty big ways. Oh, ESG is all fluff. It is, dilutive to financial performance. It, has no bearing, and we know that is not true. But we need to continue to prove that with our financial returns and with, as Tom just said, these are table stakes on the governance side in particular. It's table stakes. This is how you operate your business and deliver for your investors. So the onus is on us to continue pushing against that misconception.
Yeah, I would echo that too. The biggest misconception I see worldwide, and it's not just multifamily; it's everywhere. It's that ESG is detached from financial performance, but it's not.
Right.
It's just a matter of if you're doing it right and you're using the materiality tools and your logic chain is well founded. There's a direct connection between profitability and ESG. So we have a few minutes left. This has been a very great discussion. I appreciate it. I'll give you both a chance to just maybe offer any advice or getting started wishes or closing thoughts. So Rachel, do you want to have anything to share with the audience before we let them go?
Sure. I mean, I think maybe my advice comes from both the seat I'm in now and the seats I've been in previously. This is not about perfection on day one. This is about incremental work and really laying the tracks for what to be the long-term goal. Within the impact field, it can be, particularly if you're this person owning the data, reporting the data day in, day out, we know that the level of need in our portfolios, both from a sustainability perspective and a social perspective, is incredibly high. And so if we're only ever looking at what is left to do, it can be a little bit defeating, right? Because we know that there's constantly more. I mean, that is the point of impact, is that we're pushing forward and we're demonstrating what we've contributed that would not have happened otherwise. But I think it's really important for the people sitting in that seat to look at where you've been and continue also thinking about how much distance you've put between where you started and where you are today, and recognizing that if you did that in your first year, you're going to do that and more in your second year and that and more in your third. So to just kind of let yourself do incremental work, be honest and reflective around the areas that aren't working yet, because that's the only way you're going to get to how they will eventually work. So that's my bit of advice, and maybe as a closing thought, like, we love to hear from the industry. We love to be helpful. So please reach out and let us know how we can support. And we're very grateful to the Conservice team, not only for giving us a space today, very grateful for the conversation, Jack, but also just to know that your service really helps a lot of our members, Lincoln Avenue included, figure out that data and wrap their hands around how they might support at least the climate resiliency, if not other principles within the framework. So thank you for your work that you facilitate for folks in the field.
If I were to kind of focus on two things, the first one I mentioned a bit already, like the data management piece of this is really important, and having the right platforms in place and the right, the right partners to help you with that is really critical. And we really did have to rebuild a lot of systems. When I think about the other piece of it, to me, there's like internal opportunities and external opportunities. So we talked a little bit about like how capital may, may look at the work that we're doing and how we report out. I look at this as much as an internal tool to make our business better, but that's only going to work with really strong engagement across all aspects internally within our company. So we've uncovered lots of opportunities that have been, that are really partnership opportunities within our development platform, our asset management platform, lots of conversations with our CFO and our general counsel on internal controls. HR has been really involved. And, as much as, it's my job to try to, I guess, like my construction team too, my job is to shepherd a lot of those initiatives and then try to keep the team engaged in our learnings from from the benchmarking, from the reporting, so that we can actualize them into value creation opportunities. But you have to have consistent, like, it's not just a sustainability officer in the back room running everything. You really need to have good cross-vertical partnerships and strong leadership and engagement if you're going to actually make this more than a report that sits on a shelf, but actually part of a business development tool. So that's where we started, honestly, was before we even engaged the consultant on the maturity assessment. It was making sure everybody understood what was the value the ROI we were intending to uncover through this process, and having them highly engaged in the process along the way, so that those opportunities will be unleashed.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you. I'd like to thank you both, Rachel and Tom. This has been a very great discussion. Thank you for your time today. That will conclude today's webinar. The recording will be sent out shortly to those who are in attendance. And if you have any questions for our panelists or speakers, just reach out to us. We're happy to help. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a good day, everybody.
This was fun. Thanks, Jack.